I walked into the principal's office and she said, "You assaulted 3 students during your class yesterday." I stood in the doorway of Principal Diane Beckworth's office at Lincoln Heights High School, still holding my coffee mug with the faded "World's Best Teacher" print that my students had given me 3 years ago. The mug felt suddenly heavy in my hand, like it was made of lead instead of ceramic. My name is Aaron Whitfield, and I'd been teaching sophomore English at Lincoln Heights for 11 years without a single disciplinary incident. I'd won Teacher of the Year twice, sponsored the debate team to state championships, and had a waiting list of students who wanted into my advanced literature course. Yesterday, I'd taught 4 classes, graded essays during my planning period, stayed late for student conferences, and driven home completely exhausted but satisfied with a productive day. Now Principal Beckworth sat behind her desk with her hands folded, flanked by Assistant Principal Gerald Moss and someone I didn't recognize wearing a visitor badge. Their faces were grave, like they were about to deliver news of a death. "I'm sorry, what?" I finally managed to say. My voice sounded distant, like it belonged to someone else. Principal Beckworth's expression didn't change. She was in her late 50s, gray hair pulled back in a severe bun, reading glasses on a chain around her neck. We'd always had a cordial professional relationship. She'd supported my curriculum innovations and defended my teaching methods when parents complained their kids were being challenged too much. Now she looked at me like I was a stranger she'd discovered trespassing on school property. "Mr. Whitfield, we've received formal complaints from 3 students in your 3rd period class. They've provided written statements and supporting evidence alleging that you physically assaulted them during class yesterday. We're required by district policy to place you on immediate administrative leave while we investigate these allegations." The stranger with the visitor badge spoke for the first time. "I'm Detective Julia Brennan with the Juvenile Division. These are serious allegations, Mr. Whitfield. I'll need to ask you some questions about your interactions with these students." I'd been teaching at Lincoln Heights since I was 26 years old. Fresh out of graduate school with a master's in English literature and idealistic dreams about inspiring young minds. The school served a mixed demographic, kids from working-class families and wealthier suburbs, all thrown together in a building that was perpetually underfunded and overcrowded. I loved it. I loved the challenge of reaching students who'd been told they weren't smart enough for advanced coursework, loved watching them discover they could analyze Shakespeare and debate Faulkner with the best of them. My 3rd period class this semester was particularly strong, 28 sophomores who'd shown real enthusiasm for the curriculum. We were in the middle of studying To Kill a Mockingbird and having incredible discussions about justice, prejudice, and moral courage. Yesterday's class had been no different from any other day. I'd lectured on the trial scene, facilitated a student-led discussion about Atticus Finch's defense strategy, and assigned homework analyzing the symbolism of the mockingbird. The period had ended at 11:15. Students had filed out chatting about their plans for lunch, and I'd moved on to 4th period without incident. Or so I thought. Now Detective Brennan was asking me to account for every minute of that class period, every interaction with students, every movement I'd made in the classroom. "Which 3 students?" I asked, my mind racing through the roster. "I need to know who's making these accusations." Principal Beckworth exchanged a glance with Gerald Moss before answering. "Brittany Caldwell, Josh Simmons, and Alyssa Dunn. They've each provided detailed statements describing separate incidents during yesterday's 3rd period class. Those names hit me like physical blows. Brittany was one of my strongest students, always participating, always prepared, always respectful. Josh was quieter, but engaged, turning in solid work consistently. Alyssa had struggled at the start of the semester, but had been improving steadily with extra help. I couldn't imagine any of them making false accusations, but I also knew with absolute certainty that I hadn't touched any of them inappropriately. "This is insane," I said, my voice rising. "I didn't assault anyone yesterday or any other day. I've never laid a hand on a student except to shake hands or give the occasional high five when someone does well on a test." "What exactly are they claiming I did?" Detective Brennan pulled out a folder and opened it on Principal Beckworth's desk. "According to Brittany's statement, you grabbed her arm forcefully when she tried to leave the classroom during the lesson. She says you left bruises." She showed me a photo of Brittany's upper arm with dark purple bruises in what looked like finger mark patterns. My stomach dropped. "According to Josh Simmons, you shoved him into a desk when he questioned one of your interpretations of the text. He has a bruised hip and scraped elbow from the impact. Another photo, this one showing Josh's side with visible bruising and his elbow with what appeared to be a fresh abrasion. And according to Alyssa Dunn, you grabbed her shoulder roughly and squeezed it hard enough to hurt when she was passing out papers. She also has bruising. A third photo, showing Alyssa's shoulder with distinct bruise marks. I felt like the room was tilting. These were real injuries on real students from my class, but I had absolutely no memory of causing them because I hadn't. I'd never grabbed Brittany's arm or shoved Josh or squeezed Alyssa's shoulder. None of those incidents had happened. Yet here were photos of injuries and 3 students making specific, detailed accusations. I need to see the full statements, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I have a right to know exactly what I'm being accused of before I respond. Gerald Moss spoke for the first time. He was in his mid-40s, ambitious, always angling for a superintendent position somewhere. Mr. Whitfield, district policy requires us to conduct a preliminary investigation before sharing detailed allegations with accused parties. We're following proper protocol here. I wanted to argue, but Detective Brennan cut me off. I'll need you to come to the station to provide a formal statement. You're not under arrest at this time, but these allegations constitute potential assault charges involving minors. The district attorney's office will review the case. My hands were shaking so badly I had to set down the coffee mug on the edge of Principal Beckworth's desk. 11 years of teaching, thousands of students, countless interactions, and now my entire career was being destroyed by accusations I couldn't defend against because I had no idea where they'd come from. I want a lawyer, I said. I'm not answering any questions without legal representation. Detective Brennan nodded like she'd expected that response. That's your right. Here's my card. Have your attorney contact me to schedule an interview. She handed me a business card that felt like it weighed 100 pounds. Principal Beckworth stood up, signaling the meeting was over. Mr. Whitfield, you'll need to collect your personal belongings from your classroom. Security will escort you. Your classes have been covered by substitutes for the remainder of the week, pending the investigation outcome. You'll receive official notification of your administrative leave status via email within 24 hours. I walked out of that office in a fog, barely registering the security guard who appeared beside me as I made my way through hallways I'd walked for over a decade. Students stared as I passed. Word had already spread somehow. That's how high schools worked. Gossip traveled faster than official communication. By the time I reached my classroom, I could feel dozens of eyes on me, hear whispered conversations stopping as I approached. My classroom looked exactly as I'd left it that morning. Student desks arranged in a semicircle for better discussion participation, whiteboard still showing yesterday's notes about courtroom procedures in To Kill a Mockingbird, my desk covered with essays I'd been grading. The security guard stood in the doorway while I gathered my laptop, my gradebook, a few personal photos from my desk drawer. The whole time I kept thinking there had to be some explanation, some misunderstanding that would clear this up once everyone calmed down and talked rationally. But those bruises in the photos weren't misunderstandings. Someone had hurt those students, and 3 separate kids were all saying it was me. I drove home on autopilot, my mind spinning through every interaction I'd had with Brittany, Josh, and Alyssa over the past semester. Had I accidentally bumped into someone? Had there been a moment where physical contact occurred that could be misinterpreted? I went through every detail I could remember about yesterday's 3rd period class and came up blank. Nothing unusual had happened. No one had tried to leave during the lesson. Josh hadn't questioned my interpretation of anything. Alyssa had passed out papers without incident. The version of class I remembered was completely different from the one being described in these accusations. I called my brother David first, before even getting out of my car in the driveway. David was a corporate attorney, not a criminal defense lawyer, but he'd know who to call. "Slow down," he said after I'd rushed through the whole story. "You're saying 3 students are accusing you of assault? You have no memory of any of these incidents, and there are photos of actual injuries?" I confirmed everything. David was quiet for a moment, the kind of silence that meant he was already analyzing the situation legally. "Okay, here's what you do immediately. Do not talk to anyone from the school, the police, or the students' families without an attorney present. Document everything you remember about yesterday in as much detail as possible. while it's still fresh. I'm going to call Rebecca Holt. She's one of the best criminal defense attorneys in the state, and she specializes in cases involving false accusations. Don't leave your house. Don't post anything on social media. Don't talk to reporters if they show up. Just sit tight until Rebecca calls you. Rebecca Holt called within an hour. She had a reputation for taking on difficult cases and winning them. Her voice on the phone was all business, no sympathy, but no judgment either. Mr. Whitfield, your brother gave me the basics. I need you to come to my office tomorrow morning at 9 so we can go through everything in detail. In the meantime, I'm requesting copies of the formal complaints and any evidence the school district has gathered. Don't answer any calls from the detective or the school. Forward everything to me. Understood? I agreed to everything. The rest of that day was a nightmare of waiting and spiraling thoughts. By evening, the story had hit local news. Lincoln Heights teacher accused of assaulting students ran on the Channel 7 website with a photo of the school, but no mention of my name yet. The comments section was already filling up with people demanding I be fired, prosecuted, and worse. Someone had leaked enough details that people were speculating about my identity. By the next morning, my name was public. Aaron Whitfield, 11-year teacher, faces multiple assault allegations. The article included quotes from parents expressing shock and anger, from school board members promising a thorough investigation, from a district spokesperson emphasizing their commitment to student safety. My phone started ringing with calls from reporters, former students, colleagues, and random numbers I didn't recognize. I ignored them all as Rebecca had instructed. The meeting at Rebecca's office the next morning was brutal. She had me walk through every minute of the day in question, every interaction with every student, every movement I'd made in the classroom. Rebecca was in her early 50s, sharp features, gray-streaked dark hair pulled back, and eyes that missed nothing. She took notes on a legal pad while I talked, occasionally asking clarifying questions. The problem, Rebecca said when I finished, is that you don't have witnesses to prove these incidents didn't happen. In a classroom of 28 students, surely someone saw what actually occurred, but if the other students confirm that these assaults happened, your word against multiple eyewitnesses won't hold up in court. I hadn't thought about that. There had been 25 other students in the room during third period. If they corroborated the accusations, I was finished. What about security cameras? I asked. The school has cameras in the hallways. Maybe there's something that shows these students weren't injured when they entered my class. Rebecca made a note. Good thinking. We'll subpoena all security footage from that day. But classroom cameras are rare due to privacy concerns and budget constraints. Do you know if your room has one? I shook my head. Lincoln Heights didn't have cameras in classrooms as far as I knew, Rebecca continued. We need to consider the possibility that this is coordinated. 3 separate students making similar accusations on the same day suggests either a genuine pattern of behavior or a planned attack. If it's the latter, we need to find out why these students would target you specifically. Have you had any conflicts with them? Failed any of them? Disciplined them for cheating? I thought about each student carefully. Brittany had an A in my class, perfect attendance, no behavioral issues. Josh was pulling a solid B, never caused any problems. Alyssa had struggled at the beginning of the semester, and I'd kept her after class a few times to go over assignments, but her grades had improved significantly. She'd seemed grateful for the extra help, not resentful. No conflicts I can think of, I said. These were good kids. That's what makes this so incomprehensible. Rebecca's expression was skeptical. Nobody makes up assault allegations involving injuries for no reason. Either something happened that you're not remembering correctly, or there's a motive we haven't identified yet. We need to figure out which one. Over the next few days, Rebecca started gathering evidence. She subpoenaed the school's security footage, the formal complaint statements from the 3 students, any video or photo evidence beyond what I'd been shown in Principal Beckworth's office, and the names of all students in my third period class for potential witness interviews. The school district fought the subpoenas, citing privacy concerns and pending investigation protocols, but Rebecca had a judge's order, and they had to comply. The security footage arrived first. Rebecca and I watched hours of hallway video from the day in question, tracking students entering and leaving my classroom. The timestamp showed students arriving for third period at 10:18 a.m. Brittany, Josh, and Alyssa were all visible entering the classroom. None of them appeared injured, limping, or in distress. They were laughing and talking with other students, looking completely normal. The class ran until 11:15 a.m. When students exited, I watched carefully for any signs of injury or distress from the three accusers. Brittany walked out with her backpack over her shoulder, talking animatedly with another girl. No visible bruising on her arm, no indication she was in pain. Josh was laughing at something another student said, moving freely with no signs of a bruised hip or scraped elbow. Alyssa exited last, as usual, since her locker was in the opposite direction. She looked fine, no protective posture around her shoulder. "This is good," Rebecca said, pausing the footage. "This shows they weren't visibly injured immediately after your class, but it doesn't prove the injuries didn't exist. Bruising can take hours to develop fully, and they could have been hiding pain." I felt my hope deflating. The security footage helped, but wasn't the smoking gun I'd hoped for. The formal complaint statements arrived next, and reading them made my hands shake with anger and disbelief. Brittany's statement described how I'd grabbed her arm when she stood up to go to the bathroom without permission. She claimed I'd said, "Sit down, you don't leave my class without asking," and yanked her back into her seat hard enough to leave finger mark bruises. She said other students had gasped, and she'd been too shocked and scared to report it immediately. She'd gone to the nurse's office after school when the pain got worse and the bruises had appeared. Josh's statement said I'd shoved him into a desk after he'd questioned my interpretation of Atticus Finch's character. He claimed I'd said, "Don't challenge me in front of the class," and pushed him hard enough that he'd stumbled into the desk corner, hitting his hip and scraping his elbow on the desk edge. He said he'd been embarrassed to report it right away because other students were laughing. Alyssa's statement described how I'd grabbed her shoulder and squeezed it hard when she was passing back graded essays. She claimed I'd said, "You need to focus more," while digging my fingers into her shoulder to emphasize the point. She said it had hurt, but she hadn't wanted to make a scene in class. All three statements included one critical detail. They'd each told at least one parent about the incident that same evening, and their parents had encouraged them to report it to the school administration. The parents had photographed the injuries that night as evidence. This explained the timeline. The assaults allegedly happened during third period yesterday. Students told parents that evening. Parents documented injuries and contacted the school, and I was called into the principal's office the following morning. Rebecca pointed out the problems with their stories. If you grabbed Brittany's arm hard enough to leave deep bruising, she would have reacted immediately. Students would have seen it happen. The same with Josh being shoved into a desk. That's a loud, dramatic incident. Other students would remember it clearly. And grabbing a student's shoulder hard enough to cause bruising while saying they need to focus? That's bizarre behavior that doesn't match your professional history at all. I agreed with all of that. The stories didn't make sense behaviorally or logistically, but they were detailed and consistent with visible injuries. Without witnesses contradicting them, how could I prove they were lying? The answer came from an unexpected source. 3 days after my administrative leave began, I received an email from a student named Casey Thornton. Casey had been in my third period class, sat in the back corner, quiet kid who did solid work, but rarely volunteered to speak. The email was brief. "Mr. Whitfield, I know you didn't hurt anyone in class. I was there the whole time and none of what they're saying happened. I want to help, but I'm scared of what might happen if I come forward. Can we talk?" I forwarded the email to Rebecca immediately. She called me within minutes. "This could be the break we need. I want to interview this student with parental consent and record everything. If Casey is willing to provide a statement contradicting the accusations, it starts to unravel their story." Rebecca contacted Casey's parents that day and explained the situation. They agreed to bring Casey in for an interview after school. I wasn't allowed to be present, but Rebecca recorded everything and called me afterward with an update that changed everything. "Casey says none of the alleged incidents happened during class," Rebecca told me. "Casey sat where they could see the whole room and you the entire period. Brittany never tried to get up to go to the bathroom. Josh never questioned your interpretation of anything. Alyssa passed back papers without incident. Casey is adamant that your class proceeded normally with no physical altercations or unusual behavior from you." I felt a rush of relief so intense I had to sit down. Finally, someone was corroborating my version of events. But Rebecca's next words tempered my hope. The problem is, Casey also says they didn't see any bruises or injuries on the three accusers during class, which makes sense if the injuries were inflicted later. But Casey did mention something interesting. All three accusers, Brittany, Josh, and Alyssa, are close friends. They sit together at lunch, hang out after school, and are all involved with the drama club. Casey found it suspicious that three friends would all suddenly have separate allegations against the same teacher. That detail hit me hard. I'd known the three students were friendly with each other, but I hadn't realized they were particularly close. If they were coordinating a false accusation, that would explain the timing and similarity of their stories. But why? What possible motive would three good students have for destroying my career? Rebecca continued her investigation, interviewing other students from third period with parental permission. She found 5 more students willing to provide statements contradicting the accusations. All of them said class had proceeded normally, none of them had witnessed any physical altercations, and none of them had noticed injuries on Brittany, Josh, or Alyssa during or immediately after class. The statements were consistent and detailed. Rebecca compiled them into a formal filing with the school district and the police, demanding the investigation be closed and my suspension lifted. The school district's response was to double down. They issued a statement saying they took all allegations seriously and would complete their investigation thoroughly before making any decisions about my employment status. They noted that several students had come forward supporting the accusations, claiming they'd witnessed the incidents but had been afraid to speak up initially. This was new information Rebecca and I hadn't heard. When she requested the names of these supporting witnesses, the district claimed privacy restrictions prevented them from sharing that information during an ongoing investigation. We were stuck in legal limbo while my reputation was destroyed daily in the court of public opinion. The Facebook group, Parents of Lincoln Heights Students, had threads with hundreds of comments demanding I be fired and prosecuted. Someone started a petition calling for my permanent removal from teaching. It gathered 2,000 signatures in 3 days. Former students I'd taught years ago were being asked by reporters whether I'd ever been inappropriate with them. Most defended me, saying they'd never witnessed anything concerning, but a few gave vague, now that you mention it, responses that were twisted into suggestions of a pattern of behavior. My face was on local news almost every night as the story evolved. New witnesses come forward in teacher assault case ran one headline after the district's statement about supporting witnesses. I was being tried and convicted in the media without any opportunity to present my side because my lawyer had correctly advised me not to speak publicly during an active investigation. The breaking point came 2 weeks after my suspension began. I received a call from Rebecca at 11:00 p.m. on a Friday night. Her voice was tight with barely controlled anger. "Aaron, I need you to come to my office tomorrow morning at 8. We've got a development that changes everything." I barely slept that night, my mind racing through possibilities. When I arrived at Rebecca's office the next morning, she had her laptop open to a video file. "This was sent to me anonymously last night from an email account that's already been deleted," Rebecca said. "I've verified it's authentic, not edited or manipulated. You need to watch this." She played the video. The footage showed a basement rec room, clearly someone's home. Brittany, Josh, and Alyssa were sitting on a couch. A fourth person I recognized as Vanessa Cole, another student from my third period class, was filming. The timestamp on the video was from 2 days before the alleged assaults. Brittany was speaking. "Okay, so here's the plan. We each give separate statements that match in general details, but differ enough to seem independent. We photograph the bruises the night before so they look fresh. We tell our parents right away so they're witnesses to our distress and document everything. By the time anyone questions it, the story will be set." Josh added, "What about other students seeing it happen? Someone's going to say they didn't notice anything." Alyssa responded, "That's why we only tell specific people what we saw. We get Madison, Trevor, and Kayla to back us up. They'll say they saw something but weren't sure what was happening until we came forward. That makes it look like witnesses are corroborating without having too many specific details that could be contradicted." Vanessa's voice from behind the camera asked, "And you're sure this will work? What if he has an alibi or security footage or something?" Brittany smiled, a cold expression I'd never seen on her face before. "He can't have an alibi for something that supposedly happened in his own classroom. And there are no cameras in classrooms. It's his word against three of us. Plus, supporting witnesses. He's done. The video ended there. I sat in stunned silence, my mind reeling. They'd planned this. Carefully, deliberately planned to frame me for assault, complete with self-inflicted injuries, coordinated statements, and recruited witnesses. But why? Rebecca was already on her phone, contacting Detective Brennan. I'm sending you video evidence that exonerates my client and implicates 4 students in conspiracy to file false reports. We need these students questioned immediately, and formal charges dropped against Mr. Whitfield within 24 hours. She sent the video file, then turned to me. Someone sent this anonymously because they couldn't live with what these kids were planning. Probably another student who knew about it. This video is devastating evidence of conspiracy. The question now is why they targeted you specifically. Detective Brennan arrived at Rebecca's office within an hour. She watched the video 3 times without speaking, her expression growing darker with each viewing. This is criminal conspiracy to file false reports, obstruction of justice, and several other charges I'll need to consult with the DA about, she finally said. These kids destroyed a man's reputation and career as part of a planned attack. I need to understand their motive. I spoke up for the first time. I've been thinking about that constantly. The only thing I can come up with is grades, but these were all good students. I hadn't failed any of them, or given them anything lower than what they'd earned. Detective Brennan made notes. We'll question them separately and see whose story breaks first. Kids this age usually crack under pressure, especially when confronted with video evidence of their planning. Do you consent to having your name cleared publicly once we confirm this video's authenticity and question the students involved? I looked at Rebecca. She nodded. My client has been unjustly accused and publicly vilified. He deserves immediate and complete exoneration. The investigation moved rapidly after that. Detective Brennan brought in all 4 students visible in the video for questioning with their parents present. Vanessa Cole broke first, as Rebecca had predicted. She admitted to filming the planning session and sending the video to Rebecca anonymously because she felt guilty about what they were planning. She explained the motive, and it was even more disturbing than I'd imagined. Brittany, Josh, and Alyssa had hatched the plan as revenge for my refusal to change grades they felt they deserved. But it wasn't about failing them. It was about perfection. Brittany had received a 94 on a major essay she believed deserved a 98 or higher. She'd argued with me during office hours about my feedback, claiming I was being too harsh on her thesis statement. I'd explained my grading rubric carefully, showing where she could have strengthened her argument, and told her the grade was fair, based on the criteria I'd outlined in the assignment. She'd left angry, feeling I was preventing her from having a perfect GPA. Josh had gotten an 89 on a test, 1 point away from an A-. He'd asked me to round it up, and I'd declined, explaining that I didn't round grades because it was unfair to other students who'd scored right at grade boundaries. He'd seemed to accept it at the time, but apparently he'd been harboring resentment. Alyssa's situation was different. She was pulling a B+ in my class, which was actually a significant improvement from her earlier C work. But she'd been told by her parents that she needed straight A's to get into her preferred college. She'd asked me for extra credit opportunities, and I'd explained that I offered extra help, but not extra credit, because it undermined the existing grading structure. She'd also left that conversation unhappy. The 3 of them had bonded over their shared frustration with me, and over weeks of complaining to each other, the anger had festered into something darker. Brittany had suggested they could get me fired if they coordinated assault allegations. The others had initially thought she was joking, but Brittany had persisted, researching how assault claims were investigated and what kind of evidence would be most convincing. She'd learned that injuries photographed shortly after an alleged incident were taken seriously, that multiple accusers made claims more credible, and that teachers rarely had cameras in classrooms to contradict student statements. They'd recruited Vanessa to film their planning session, supposedly as insurance that everyone would stick to the story and not back out. But Vanessa had become increasingly uncomfortable as the plan developed, and had eventually sent the video to my lawyer anonymously. The bruises in the photos had been self-inflicted, created by the students deliberately injuring themselves to frame me. Brittany had used a heavy textbook to create the finger mark pattern on her arm. Josh had thrown himself into furniture at home to create the hip bruise and scraped his own elbow. Alyssa had used her fingers to pinch her own shoulder hard enough to bruise. They'd photographed everything, practiced their stories until they had them memorized, and executed the plan with disturbing precision. When confronted with the video evidence and Vanessa's testimony, all three admitted to the conspiracy. Their parents were horrified. Brittany's mother broke down crying during the interview, saying she couldn't believe her daughter was capable of such cruelty. Josh's father was furious, telling Detective Brennan that Josh would face serious consequences at home beyond whatever legal penalties resulted. Alyssa's parents sat in stunned silence as their daughter confessed to deliberately framing a teacher over a grade dispute. The students, who'd supposedly witnessed the incidents and corroborated the accusations, were also questioned. Two of them, Madison and Trevor, admitted they'd never witnessed anything but had agreed to support the accusations because Brittany had convinced them I was unfairly harsh with grades. They'd thought they were helping right a wrong, not participating in a criminal conspiracy. The third student, Kayla, had actually believed the accusations were real and was devastated to learn she'd been manipulated into giving false testimony. The district attorney, Michael Vance, held a press conference 3 days after the video came to light. He stood at a podium in front of multiple cameras and reporters, looking grim. After a thorough investigation, we've determined that Aaron Whitfield, the Lincoln Heights High School teacher accused of assaulting students, was the victim of a coordinated false accusation. 4 students have admitted to planning and executing a scheme to frame Mr. Whitfield for assaults that never occurred. The students involved have been charged with filing false reports, conspiracy, and obstruction of justice. Given their ages and the circumstances, these cases will be handled through juvenile court. Mr. Whitfield is completely exonerated of all allegations, and we apologize for the impact this false accusation has had on his life and reputation. He took questions from reporters for 20 minutes, confirming details about the video evidence, the self-inflicted injuries, and the students' motives. He emphasized that false accusations harm real victims of assault by making people skeptical of legitimate claims. He praised Vanessa Cole for coming forward with evidence, noting that her cooperation had prevented a serious miscarriage of justice. Principal Beckworth issued a statement on behalf of Lincoln Heights High School. We deeply regret the harm caused to Mr. Whitfield by these false accusations. Our investigation was ongoing, and proper protocols were followed, but we acknowledge that an innocent teacher's reputation was damaged by students who manipulated our systems, designed to protect victims. Mr. Whitfield's administrative leave is immediately lifted, and he is welcome to return to his position. We will be reviewing our procedures for handling allegations to prevent similar situations in the future. The statement was professional and carefully worded to minimize the school's liability while acknowledging the injustice. It didn't mention that they'd fought Rebecca's subpoenas, publicly announced supporting witnesses before verifying their statements, or contributed to the media narrative that had destroyed my reputation. The media coverage shifted dramatically. Teacher exonerated after students admit false accusations ran on every major outlet. The comment sections that had been filled with calls for my prosecution now filled with apologies and outrage at the students who'd framed me. Several parents who'd signed the petition demanding my firing posted retractions and apologies. Former students who'd defended me were vindicated, and those who'd given vague suggestions of concerning behavior now faced backlash for contributing to the rush to judgment. I appeared on local news with Rebecca by my side, giving my first public statement since the accusations had been made. The past few weeks have been the most difficult of my life, I said, my voice steady, despite the emotions churning inside me. I've been publicly accused of horrible crimes I didn't commit, had my reputation destroyed, and faced the possibility of losing everything I've worked for as an educator. I'm relieved the truth has come out, but I'm also deeply troubled that students felt empowered to weaponize assault allegations over grade disputes. This kind of false accusation hurts real victims and undermines trust in systems meant to protect students from actual abuse. I didn't name the students involved since they were minors, but I emphasized that there needed to be serious consequences for this kind of conspiracy. Rebecca added comments about the legal proceedings and emphasized my complete exoneration. The juvenile court cases moved through the system over the following months. Brittany, Josh, and Alyssa were each sentenced to 200 hours of community service, mandatory counseling, formal apologies to me in writing, and probation until they turned 18. They were expelled from Lincoln Heights and required to complete their education through alternative programs. Madison and Trevor, the students who'd provided false corroboration, received lesser penalties since they'd been manipulated by Brittany and hadn't been part of the original planning. Vanessa Cole faced no charges due to her cooperation in exposing the conspiracy. In fact, the district attorney's office commended her decision to come forward. The civil suits came next. Rebecca filed lawsuits on my behalf against the 3 primary conspirators and their families, seeking damages for defamation, emotional distress, loss of reputation, and impact on my career. The families settled out of court for undisclosed amounts that covered my legal fees and compensated me for the harm caused. It wasn't about the money for me. It was about accountability and sending a message that false accusations had serious consequences. I also filed a lawsuit against the school district for their handling of the investigation and their contribution to the damage to my reputation. That case was more complex, involving questions about what the district knew and when, whether they'd followed proper procedures, and whether they'd acted maliciously or just incompetently. We eventually settled that case as well, with the district agreeing to pay significant damages and implement new policies for handling allegations against staff. They created a new position specifically to review evidence before administrative action was taken and implemented training for staff on recognizing potential false accusations. I went back to teaching in January, 3 months after the ordeal began. Walking back into Lincoln Heights felt surreal. The hallways looked the same. The schedule was familiar, but everything had changed. Students looked at me differently now, some with sympathy and embarrassment for believing the accusations, some with curiosity about what I'd been through, some with the usual teenage indifference, already having moved on to the next drama. My third-period class had a different roster now, with Brittany, Josh, and Alyssa gone and their seats filled by students who'd transferred in or moved up from other levels. Casey Thornton was still there, along with the other students who'd stood up for me during the investigation. On my first day back, Casey stayed after class to talk. "Mr. Whitfield, I just want to say I'm really glad you're back. I felt terrible that this happened to you, and I wasn't sure if coming forward would help or make things worse." I thanked Casey sincerely. "Your statement was crucial to the investigation. You helped prove the truth when it mattered most. I won't forget that." Casey smiled, looking relieved. "We missed you. The substitutes weren't the same. Are we still reading To Kill a Mockingbird?" I laughed, the first genuine laugh I'd had in months. "Yes, we're picking up right where we left off, and I think the themes of justice and false accusations might hit a little differently now." The rest of that semester was about rebuilding my confidence as a teacher, rebuilding trust with students and parents, rebuilding my reputation in a community that had been so quick to condemn me. I was hyper-aware of every interaction, careful to never be alone with a student, making sure classroom doors stayed open, documenting conversations that might be misinterpreted. The spontaneity and ease I'd once had with students was gone, replaced by a cautious guardedness that saddened me. But I kept teaching because I loved it, and because letting false accusations drive me out of education felt like letting the students who'd conspired against me win. The following year, I was asked to speak at a state education conference about my experience. I talked to a room full of teachers, administrators, and policymakers about the dangers of false accusations, the importance of thorough investigations before taking action, and the need to protect both students and staff. False accusations are rare, I told them, but when they happen, the damage is catastrophic and long-lasting. We need systems that protect legitimate victims while also ensuring accused individuals have due process and are not convicted in the court of public opinion before evidence is examined. It's possible to believe victims and also verify claims. These two things are not mutually exclusive. The speech was well received. Several teachers approached me afterward to share their own experiences with false accusations or fears about being targeted. One told me she'd been accused by a student of making inappropriate comments and spent 6 months under investigation before being cleared. Another said he'd changed careers after a parent accused him of bias, and the district hadn't defended him adequately. The conversation revealed how many educators were operating under fear of false accusations, walking on eggshells, avoiding any situation that could be misinterpreted. That wasn't healthy for students or teachers. Something needed to change in how these situations were handled. 3 years after the incident, I received a letter in the mail. It was from Brittany, now 19 years old and in college. She'd completed her counseling and community service, finished her education through an online program, and been accepted to a university out of state. The letter was handwritten, 3 pages of apology and reflection. Mr. Whitfield, I've wanted to write this letter for a long time, but didn't know how to put into words the magnitude of what I did and the harm I caused. I was 15 years old and obsessed with perfection, convinced that anything less than straight A's would ruin my future. When you gave me a grade I felt was unfair, I responded with anger and entitlement instead of self-reflection. I convinced Josh and Alyssa to join my plan by feeding their own frustrations and resentments, manipulating them into thinking we were justified in punishing you for being too strict. I created a conspiracy that destroyed your reputation, put your career at risk, and could have resulted in criminal charges against an innocent person. I did all of this over a grade dispute, over 4 percentage points on an essay. The shame and guilt I feel about that decision is overwhelming. I've spent the past 3 years in therapy trying to understand why I was capable of such cruelty and how to become someone who would never do anything like that again. I'm not writing this letter to ask for your forgiveness. I don't deserve it, and I'm not entitled to it. I'm writing because you deserve to know that I understand the gravity of what I did. You were a good teacher who challenged me appropriately and graded fairly. My inability to accept honest feedback says everything about my character at the time and nothing about your teaching. I destroyed a man's reputation because I couldn't handle not being perfect. That's monstrous, and I have to live with that knowledge for the rest of my life. I hope you've been able to continue teaching, and that what I did hasn't permanently damaged your ability to do work you're clearly gifted at. I hope the students you teach now appreciate what I was too immature and selfish to see. And I hope someday I can become someone who contributes positively to the world instead of destroying others for my own ego. I'm truly sorry for everything I put you through. The letter was signed simply Brittany. I read it 3 times, sitting at my kitchen table with coffee going cold in my cup. Part of me was angry that she thought a letter could somehow make up for what she'd done. Part of me was skeptical about whether the apology was genuine or just part of her mandated counseling assignments. But mostly, I felt sad. Sad that a bright 15-year-old had been so consumed by perfectionism that she'd convinced herself destroying another person was justified. Sad that grade obsession and college admission pressure had created an environment where students felt desperate enough to commit crimes. Sad that I'd never again be able to teach with the same openness and trust I'd once had. I didn't respond to the letter. I filed it away with all the other documentation from the case, a reminder of what had happened and why vigilance mattered. Maybe someday Brittany would become the person she claimed she wanted to be. Maybe Josh and Alyssa would also grow up and look back with horror at what they'd done. Or maybe they'd just become more sophisticated manipulators. I couldn't control that. I could only control how I moved forward. I stayed at Lincoln Heights for 2 more years before accepting a position at a different high school in a neighboring district. The fresh start felt necessary. I needed to teach students who didn't know my story, who hadn't witnessed my public humiliation and exoneration. I needed to walk into a building where my name wasn't associated with false accusations and conspiracy trials. At my new school, I'm just Mr. Whitfield, the English teacher who assigns challenging essays and has high expectations. My students complain about my grading like students always do, but they respect the work and rise to meet the standards I set. I've been teaching there for 5 years now, without incident. I still have classroom cameras installed at my own expense. I still keep my door open during student conferences. I still document everything meticulously. The ease and spontaneity I once had as a teacher is gone, replaced by careful professionalism and awareness of every interaction. Maybe that's better. Maybe I was too casual before, too trusting of students to always act in good faith. Or maybe what Brittany, Josh, and Alyssa did broke something in me that won't fully heal, a permanent scar from being accused of crimes I didn't commit. But I'm still teaching. Still challenging students to think critically and analyze complex texts and defend their arguments with evidence. Still showing up every day to do work that matters despite the risks. That has to count for something. The case made national news eventually, used as an example in discussions about false accusations, grade inflation, and the pressure on students. Some people held it up as proof that we should be skeptical of all allegations. Others argued it was an aberration that shouldn't impact how we respond to legitimate claims. Both missed the point. False accusations are rare, but devastating when they occur. Real abuse is far more common and often goes unreported because victims fear not being believed. These two truths can coexist. We can take allegations seriously while also conducting thorough investigations. We can believe victims and also require evidence. We can protect people who come forward while also protecting those who are falsely accused. It's complicated and nuanced and requires thinking beyond simple narratives. On my classroom wall, I have a framed quote from To Kill a Mockingbird, the book we were studying when the false accusations began. Before I can live with other folks, I've got to live with myself. The one thing that doesn't abide by majority rule is a person's conscience. It reminds me and my students that truth matters more than popularity, that integrity means standing by what's right even when it's difficult, and that our consciences are the ultimate judges of our actions. Vanessa Cole, the student who filmed the conspiracy and eventually sent the video that exonerated me, embodied that principle. She'd been part of something wrong and couldn't live with herself until she made it right. That took courage, especially at 15 years old when peer pressure and fear of social consequences are overwhelming. I hope my current students understand that lesson. I hope they understand that grades, while important, are just measures of academic performance at a specific moment. They're not measures of worth or destiny or potential. They're feedback for improvement. And when you get feedback you don't like, the answer is to work harder, not to destroy the person who gave it to you. That's the lesson Brittany, Josh, and Alyssa had to learn the hard way. I hope they did learn it. I hope they're better people now. But whether they are or not, I survived. I was exonerated, and I'm still teaching. That's my version of justice. If you made it this far, hit like. You've earned it.